Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Sustainable Mail Group's third symposium of 2024, which is Stretching Sustainability. My name is Andrew Gustin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainable Mail Group. Before we begin providing a bit of an introduction as to who we are and what this whole session is about, I wanted to extend just a grateful thanks to the folks at Spicers for making this possibility happen. They're both a sponsor of the Sustainable Mail Group as well as being a Malpac distributor. And if you folks have any questions with regards to any of the topics that are being discussed right now, you can address them to the folks at Spicers there's a link in the chat right now, both to Spicers as well as to one of their individuals' email addresses and Scott Roulston. Just to do some minor housekeeping for folks, just as we go through this, we're scheduled actually to hold this event from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. this afternoon. You can ask questions at any time during the session itself in the chat or the Q&A function, but just to make sure that we get continuity through the topic, the questions won't be answered to the last 10 minutes of the session itself. The event is being recorded for posterity for our YouTube channel, and you can go there. Again, the link's provided in the chat to see any of the past sessions that we've ended up hosting and anything that you may have missed. If you don't want to miss any of that content, click on the bell, subscribe to our channel. You guys get the drill. You've probably seen enough YouTube videos. And finally, most importantly, if you like what you see, and you see benefit to participation, we encourage you folks to join the Sustainable Mail Group, and there's a link again in the chat providing you some details as to how to go about joining the group. And maybe before I go into asking the panelists to introduce themselves, maybe it would be a good opportunity to provide a bit of an insight as to why we're hosting this particular session, and why some of the participants are in it that they are. So the Sustainable Mail Group, since its inception, have been strong advocates for the responsible use of plastics in the mail stream, from the get-go 3 years ago. We are implementation partners of the Canada Plastics Pact, and the folks at Malpac are actually members of the Canada Plastics Pact. And the Canada Plastics Pact's focus has been to tackle plastic waste and pollution by creating a circular economy for plastics in Canada. One of our largest stakeholders happens to be Canada Post. And since I joined the Sustainable Mail Group, we've had numerous occasions where people have brought up the issue of plastic waste associated with the use of stretch film at Canada Post's plants. And so what we hoped to achieve through this is to engage in a dialogue to illustrate the level of waste that is being produced right now, and to engage with some of the stakeholders to educate people around potential options that are available both economically as well as environmentally preferable stretch film programs. But one thing I really do want to highlight in this is that we are not trying to establish a roadmap for stretch film. Like, that's not what the goal of this session is by any stretch of the imagination. It's meant to end up being an information session and to enable and start some dialogue. So maybe the place to start then would be for us to get into an introduction for our panelists, and I'll turn it over to them, and we'll start with Siobhan from Canada Post.
Great, thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for having me as a part of this panel discussion. So my name is Siobhan Finan, and I work as a manager on the real estate sustainability team at Canada Post. We have a variety of different sustainability teams at Canada Post, but my team mainly focuses on projects that are more boots on the ground, so implementing different either GHG reduction or zero waste initiatives in our physical facilities. So I'm certified as a true advisor and lead green associate. I've been working with Canada Post for about 5 years now. I was able to come on as a summer student and then really get to grow within the organization, which has been fantastic. And I lead our zero waste program. So as we'll get into later on in the panel, we have a target to divert at least 90% of our waste from the landfill in both our operations and construction by 2030. So we have a variety of different projects going on, all aiming to get us towards that target. And I oversee and manage those different programs. So looking forward to getting into this discussion on shrink wrap. And I'll pass it back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Siobhan. I just want to highlight something here, because if you're not going to toot your own horn, I'll toot your horn for you. You are also a recipient of the 30 under 30 recognition from Corporate Knights magazine. So that is not an insignificant feat, and I think that we should all applaud the fact that you've done that. So if you look at Siobhan's background bio in the link, applause for that. Ricardo
Thank you. I
and
appreciate
Bob.
that.
We off the mute there, Drew?
No, you guys
Thank
are
you
good.
very much, Andrew. Ricardo Cardoso, President, CEO for Malpac and Trio World North America. I've been with the company for 9 years and are really looking to establish a roadmap for circularity in North America. By market share, we're the largest, we believe we have the largest market position in Canada in producing ultra high performance stretch films, and are the 5th largest player in North America. With Trio World at our back, we're about $1 billion entity, and are in the top 5 global players in this space, but certainly focusing on increasing circularity, extreme down gauging using ultra high performance films and the performance that you're able to achieve out of that. And certainly very excited to have this conversation with you today and the broader group in exploring what we can do to sort of explore this area for the betterment of our future here. So with that being said, I'll maybe hand over to Bob, who's with me here, and Bob can introduce himself.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Arpus. I'm Canadian Sales Director on the stretch film side of the business. I've been here at Malpac for 14 years, but been in the industry for about 40. I've seen the beginning of the introduction of stretch film into the packaging world and the many evolutions along the way to the point that we're at now, which sustainability is the cornerstone. This particular company, with the backing of Trio World, is making leaps and bounds in bringing the introduction of sustainability, containment, and thinner plastics to the market. And we hope to show you the way through this presentation of what we're doing in the marketplace at this time.
Thanks, Ricardo. Thanks, Bobby. Thanks, Siobhan. And I'm going to date myself here. I have probably known you, Bob, for 25 of those 40 years. So sorry to say we're both old. So I've got one question, first question to kind of dive in here, and it's a little bit self-serving in that there's in conversations that I've had with our stakeholder base, there's oftentimes the use of the term shrink film in lieu of stretch film. And I just want to make sure that, there's some clarity with regards to that. And so, Ricardo, Bob, what is it? What are we talking about when we're talking about stretch film? Like what's the purpose? What's the right utilization of language? And even for that matter, is it really important, to differentiate between one or the other? So let's start with that.
It's great that you called that out, because I think in the introduction we used shrink to refer to film, to stretch film, and it is quite commonly misunderstood in the market, where we know what people mean, but there are many opportunities on tenders where people are asking for you to quote things like shrink film, but they really mean stretch film. So I don't know, Drew, if you want to just pan over to the side. What we're really talking about is film that's used to transport products from point A to point B. So it's this film here that gets applied as secondary packaging to your goods in transit that minimize load security issues and really contain those goods to ensure that they properly arrive in an undamaged condition. So when we refer to shrink film, that's something that typically encases, bottles of water. It's used as a primary packaging solution for bundling. So it's really it gets confused quite often. But what we're talking today is the film that gets applied to pallets as they leave a warehouse, typically speaking, to go from point A to point B in a secure fashion.
Thanks for that. That was great. And it's a pet peeve of mine, and just wanted to highlight the fact that we're using the right terminology. So, Siobhan, let's kind of turn this over to you now, and if you want me to, I'll bring your deck up really quickly. You guys are kind of the point that got this whole conversation started because, since I've been with the Sustainable Mail Group, which is almost 2.5 years now, the conversation with anybody who's a stakeholder inside Canada Post has been, we get all this stretch film, and we don't we want to do something about it with it, but we're not really sure what to end up doing with it. And it's a highly visible element here. So maybe you can, kind of illustrate to us, what your goals are as an organization, but then also, provide some illustration as to, hey, this is kind of what this looks like when we end up getting it. Do you want me to bring up those slides on the screen?
Yeah, that would be great if you can bring up the slides. I'll walk us through our goals at Canada Post, and then as well how we end up using a shrink wrap, or how it ends up coming to us. Okay, so here on the screen, you can see just an overview of that target that I expressed earlier. So our goal at Canada Post is to be diverting at least 90% by weight of all of our solid non-hazardous waste in both operational and construction waste. So shrink wrap, stretch film, that would fall under our operational waste. And something else that I want to note is how we define diversion at Canada Post. So diversion includes recycling, reduction, and reuse. We go off of the true total resource use and efficiency definition created by the US Green Building Council. And so if there's any scenario in which we either recycle, reuse, or reduce stretch film, we are contributing to that 90% target. So you can jump to the next slide there. So here's a quick look at the impact of, I say shrink wrap in these slides, shrink wrap, stretch film, that's usually the kind of colloquial way we describe it at Canada Post, but it accounts for approximately 1 to 5% of our total waste by weight. And that might seem like a small percentage or a small number, but when you think about the fact that we at Canada Post, all of our waste related goals are done by weight, and you think about just how light stretch film is, that's actually a really significant number when it's competing against weights from cardboard, weights from surplus ad mail, weights from wooden pallets, all these very heavy materials. For it to take up even 1% is very significant. And these numbers come from our 2022 waste audit that were done at a representative sample of our facilities. So based on this 1 to 5% number, that would account for anywhere from 400 to 2,000 metric tons of stretch film coming out of our facilities each year. You can jump to the next slide. So here's my final slide. This shows you just an overview of how stretch film comes into our facilities, as well as how we aim to sort it. So mainly stretch film in our plants, which are biggest facilities, is coming from upstream from our customers. So customers might ship us cardboard gaylords or cardboard monotainers like you see on the left there. There's either those boxes, which are full of a variety of smaller boxes or smaller parcels. And then it could be like those images up above. We call that our non-con shipments. So things that don't fit typical size for sorting. And that could all be wrapped in stretch film and come to us too. And then what our employees at Canada Post need to do is at the various induction points where we induct those parcels, is they'll cut open the shrink wrap, aiming to keep the cardboard intact and not cut all the way through the cardboard. And then they'll open up the cardboard gently without aiming to damage the whole box, that it can be reused. They'll take the various packages out of that larger box, and then they will need to sort the shrink wrap, the cardboard, and the wooden pallet into a sortation area, like you can see in the image on the right there. So we actually don't use wooden pallets at Canada Post. We typically use those blue pallets that you can see in the image there. So we have to sort all those different materials there. And although shrink wrap is not the heaviest one of our materials, you can see just how much volume it takes up. That's a very small amount of weight of shrink wrap. And when you multiply that by how much we get every year, it's very important to the way that our employees look at waste at Canada Post. So they might not know that it's only 1% of their total weight, but it's very visually noticeable. And that's something that matters to us too, is not only hitting that 90% target, but making sure that we're bringing our people along the way in our sustainability journey, and that what we're really doing is also visible in the way that our employees perceive waste day to day. So mainly we aim to actually ship in those metal cages that you can see on the right-hand side of that right-hand photo. We call those our metal monotainers. Mainly, so outside of peak season, we're aiming to ship in those containers. So once those cardboard monos come in, mainly we're shipping our packages into those containers when it's going to our depots and our post offices. But in peak season is really where we see our use of shrink wrap increase, because we previously would be shipping in those metal monotainers. We don't have enough of them for peak season. So that's when we start using the cardboard on top of the pallet, secured to the pallet, and securing that cardboard with the shrink wrap. So the quality of the sortation, the amount of recycling of the shrink wrap that we're doing really depends facility to facility. Currently, we only have shrink wrap recycling happening at several of our facilities. We would really like to increase that at a minimum to all of our plants within the next couple of years. But that's a kind of quick overview of our shipping processes, and then as well, where are we getting all the shrink wrap from at Canada Post.
Thanks. That's really illustrative. So just to understand this, is you do end up, because I know we're going to get into a conversation about end of life scenarios. You guys do end up having collection in some facilities, and there are some solutions that are seemingly in place. Do you get any insight from the waste providers that you guys utilize around, how much of that material is capable of being repurposed?
Yes, so we actually recently switched to a new waste hauler. We were in the RFP process for a while, but now we are working with RTS, so Recycle Track Systems. And one of the goals in this new contract is that we're going to try and put in place more stretch film recycling at our facilities. They've shared with us that certainly at our plants, they're usually in large urban areas, so there is the possibility for recycling. We just have to set up those services and have that pickup and the sortation happening by our employees at the site. For the smaller facilities, it gets a little bit trickier when there's not necessarily the volumes to support a pickup, as well as our waste haulers always let us know that as much as you can store on site, the better, because that helps warrant the carbon emissions as well as the cost of having a truck come for pickup. And so we'll probably be looking into balers as well, because there's not it really can help when you compact down that material, because it is so light and just takes up such a high volume of space.
And the smaller facilities, sorry, not to generalize, but the smaller facilities might end up being more geographically remote, right? I mean, or are they, like, could they be in like Kitchener and Waterloo, for instance, and it's just because the city's not as big as Toronto, for instance, that, they would be considered a smaller location?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So our plants are our biggest locations. We have about 22 of those across Canada. And then we have roughly 400 depots. Those are much smaller than the plants, but still could maybe walk from one end of the facility to the other in a minute or so. So kind of medium-sized facilities. And then our post offices are things that are facilities that Canadians are all probably very familiar with. We have a mandate at Canada Post to serve all Canadians. So I'm sure wherever you are in Canada, wherever there is development or folks living, there is a Canada Post office.
Okay. And do you guys receive any of those materials into like a Canada Post location?
The shrink wrap in our post offices, do we receive it there?
Yeah.
We do at a much much scale. The biggest impact would definitely be coming out of our plants. That's where we see the vast majority of shrink wrap. But if we basically have control over whatever goes to our post offices, because that's all coming from Canada Post, moving material from plants to depots to post offices. So during peak season, when we are using shrink wrap more often internally, we're seeing higher volumes of that end up in post offices, versus at other times of the year when we have those metal monotainers available in the image I previously showed, then we're seeing smaller volumes end up in post offices. But year round, we're definitely seeing it there and seeing the highest volumes in plant.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a good idea as to where the materials come in, how they're coming in now. Ricardo and Bob, can you kind of give us I guess the best way to end up describing this is a primer around, stretch film, what kind of applications are there? I mean, I know this from, having been on the product management side of those things, to be able to differentiate perhaps, I think sometimes smaller volume users, which would be people who end up using hand film versus larger volume users, which might end up being machine film applications, and what those typical users might look like and what those use cases are. And I'll just kind of turn it over to you around that explanation, and also kind of walk us through better solutions that are available, whether they be thinner films, whether they pre-stretch applications, whether it ended up being, applications around, using, optimizing how film is used in machine applications and how you can measure that stuff. So I'll just mute myself and turn it over to you, and just tell me if you need me to present anything on the screen.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe Bob, I'll start just by giving a preamble, and then perhaps you can talk to what you see on a daily basis with our team and supporting the likes of Spicers in the field. Why do we see so much stretch film? I guess is a great question to explore. When you think about the versatility of the product, there really isn't an alternative out there that can account for and be malleable enough to accommodate for as many applications as you get with stretch film. So from a total cost of ownership, from a total carbon footprint, there is no other more sustainable option than film today. What Canada Post was describing in terms of reuse scenarios with the caged boxes, and there are a number of different designs around that. You want to explore the 3 Rs: reduce, reuse, recycle. Focusing on that second part, those work great. I mean, they work great when you're shipping between sort of intermediary companies, perhaps related companies, when you have the ability to recover those crates back into your stream. There's a benefit to that. However, once you go outside of your own network and you don't have trucks coming back and being able to deliver it, you run into challenges like supply. Have you bought enough of those crates? They're quite expensive. When you consider the LCA impact of those types of crates, there are studies that are published which indicate that you need at least 50 turns on those crates in order for it to be equivalent to one application for linear low density polyethylene stretch film. So, the cost runs away from you a little bit. You're a little bit more limited in terms of its end user use scenarios. If you think of, how many things can you fit in a box? Well, a lot of times you're left with air. Whereas stretch film, it conforms to whatever you're wrapping at the end of the day. So you're really able to optimize the pallet configuration and work with the voids in the pallet to maximize the amount of product that you get on a truck. So very versatile, really innovative product to work with B and C type loads, so irregular shaped loads. And that's why you see so much of it in the market. Where you get into splitting the use cases on hand film and machine film, Andrew, as you described, generally speaking, you find smaller end users who maybe don't have enough turns. They have a limited amount of pallets leaving out of their warehouse. It's just more economical to wrap by hand. That's sort of one use case. But then you also have very large operations in picking and packing. So if you think of a grocery store distribution center, those that aren't fully automated today, you have quite a few individuals still scouring the aisles and picking orders off the shelves, and they need to assemble it on a pallet. And they don't have much time to do that. And the way they contain those goods to secure it while they're moving between aisles is by applying hand film. So it's very easy, it's mobile, they can take it with them, it's very light, and that's where you see it. And generally speaking, you could have those pallets that are wrapped by hand also then get wrapped with machine film. And the types of solutions that we offer are to minimize on both fronts, based both on the hand film side. So do you really need to use this thick of a film if you're just moving within your own internal warehouse and that pallet's getting wrapped again? So that's one consideration. But on the machine film side, those are very high throughput environments, quite a lot of product leaving a warehouse. They need to go to far-fetched places, need to have quite a lot of containment to secure those goods in transit. They may be high-value items. Maybe you need to insulate it from the weather. So there's a sort of an insulation element to that and protection. You also have tinted films like I have on my desk here, which, you know, depending on the opacity, it provides for that barrier for privacy. So if you're shipping, you know, high value goods and just preventing against theft, there are a number of reasons and applications for the film that cover a pretty broad spectrum. Now, having said that, you know, there's a lot of conventional films in the market. Where there are very significant opportunities to reduce the amount of plastic that you use on a day-to-day basis. And that's where our innovative products, like our flagship brands, come into the picture. And Bob and his team go day-to-day, and they really explore opportunities with end users to minimize that amount of film. And generally speaking, we can reduce up to 40% of that plastic use in the application, just through the performance of our film. And I'll turn it over to Bob, but Bob, maybe you can describe, you know, how would a cut and weigh actually work, and what is that process that allows us to validate, you know, and show that end user that extent of savings without putting, you know, load security in jeopardy?
Okay, you did a great job answering that question, by the way. And I'll just say that just a little bit more of an addition to there, you know, stretch film is used up and down the streets in industrial parks. Almost every door you open, you're going to find somebody using a roll or somebody using many pallets of stretch film and a different way of applying it to a skid. You know, the art of it has always been containment. Containment is at the core of wrapping a pallet. And from a competitive edge, and it's a very price sensitive item, the art of it is always to get good containment with a thinner roll, thinner gauged film roll, so that you can save money and demonstrate containment. So basically what we've done is we focused in on those two things, containment and you know, pallet security and getting more sustainable. So, you know, basically what we do is we have a tool. I should go and demonstrate the tool. Our distributors and our sales reps are armed with this tool here. It's a containment tool. So in about 30 minutes in a call, we can go out and with this tool, it's a Lantec tool, demonstrate the containment on a pallet based on the weight of the pallet. So we want to have, you know, if we have a 2,000 pound pallet, we want to have 10 pounds of containment showing with this tool here. And that tells us that we have enough containment. It's half a percent when we pull it back an inch and a half. And with that, we are able to select the kind of film that we want to apply to that pallet. And we can use that on hand or machine film. We then basically demonstrate that we have enough containment with one of our thinner films that we've developed along the way through our evolution process. And then, you know, what we like to do is cut the film off the pallet, and then we weigh it. And we take a look at what they're currently using to wrap the pallet. And generally it ends up being a big ball of plastic. And then we take some of our high advanced films and we weigh it on this particular scale here. And we demonstrate that we provided the same amount of containment, if not more, but with a smaller bundle of film. I mean, that's a pretty powerful thing to show a customer, big bundle versus small bundle. They understand right away what the difference is. So if you can wrap a pallet showing the same amount of containment with a thinner plastic, why wouldn't you go to that? And typically, you know, per ounce, you know, the material that we're making, because it's so much more advanced, is more expensive. However, we overcome that by using very much less plastic. So that's how we tell our story. We win almost every test that we do. Success rate is very high. This has basically been the evolution of stretch film in the industry since I've been in it. Typically, we did it from a marketing standpoint to get ahead of our competition. But in the last 5 to 6 years, that's translated well into sustainability as we focused more on that angle of the sale. And the two of those things have come together to tell our story. And it seems to be working. And everybody wants a part of this sustainability angle now. And that's the story we're telling.
So I've got a, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I've got a quick question here for you guys. And um, let's look at a case, for instance, of somebody who is using a hand film application right now. They're probably not, counting the number of times that they may end up going around that pallet, or for that matter, the level of consistency either to the weight or what that it may end up sitting on that pallet. Talking, Bob, about what your the cut and weigh methodology and the force to load in that particular example. How do you kind of square that? Like, how do you square it in a situation where somebody isn't necessarily putting in a very consistent application, or isn't necessarily that conscientious about how they're doing it? Is there some means by which you can actually just kind of say, hey, you know what, this is what it looks like, this is how many times? Sorry.
Yeah, there's a shift in the mentality of the kind of product that they're using in the hand film market. Typically, it's been, usually 60, 70, 80, 90 gauge films along the way in the traditional hand wrap market. And over the last few years, we've developed what we call a pre-stretch product, where we're doing the stretching on our machines here versus somebody stretching a film around a pallet that might be getting 10 or 20%. So we're stretching the film something like 160, 170%. We're asking people to just apply the film to the pallet. So now we're into a film that kind of looks like this. That's a 29 gauge or a 26 gauge versus a 60, 70, 80, or 90 gauge film. So right off the bat, sustainability, lightweight, it's got air in the roll, you can drop it on the floor, there's less damage. So that's the shift that's happening in the market. So it doesn't really even matter how many times a guy's going around a pallet, unless he's trying to make you look bad, this versus that. But at the end of the day, when we take the tool, okay, the containment tool that I just showed you, versus what were using previously, we're able to demonstrate that we're showing the same or better containment with a thinner product because of the technology that we've put into the film over the last few years. So this used to be just in the big grocery chains, and it's been around for 20 years. But now you're finding up and down the industrial parks that everybody wants a piece of this. It's a light roll. Instead of wrapping around a pallet backwards, you're wrapping around a pallet forwards. So there's a safety component to it. There's a price component to it. These rolls weigh much less than your traditional hand film. So, once you get the chance, you can't just leave a roll and tell somebody, here, see how you like it. A demo is required. Okay, and once you show this film the proper way, you almost always win. So you're going from a thicker product to a thinner product. Price comes into play, sustainability comes into play, and safety as well. Those are all powerful things to demonstrate in a sales call. And this is the shift that's occurring in the hand wrap industry. And at Trio World here, we're putting a lot of energy in developing this style of film to get it even thinner versus what we've had in the past years. And this takes us away from what our competitors are doing as well, and making it a special product for us. And now we're introducing actually PCR content to this as well. We have a product that we're out in the market with called VMAX 3030, which is 30 gauge, 30% PCR. It works just as well as the virgin material. So that's a great story to tell. And it's a big story in Europe. And it's being a story we're developing here in Canada. And people want this, especially the big multinational companies that have sustainability departments, right? They want this product, and they're overruling even the purchasing people by having a product like this today. Small. It comes down to something very simple. I saw that Gaylord full of plastic. Imagine if you only had 20% of the plastic that in that box instead of that full box, because you were using something that was thinner in gauge and yet still providing containment at the same rate or even better than what you've been used to, right? The easy way out is just to quote price. And we're up against that all day long. If somebody is interested in stretch film and seeing what we can do with it, in just 20 minutes, we can make a difference. And we're making it. And that's how we got the lead market share in the country in Canada with our stretch film products.
So just to kind of reiterate that and capture everything, then just to make certain, transitioning from what would typically have been a traditional hand film, right, which might be, and so just so that we're clear on the language, when we're talking gauge here, we're talking thickness, right? So what is one gauge exactly in terms of thickness and another unit of measure?
4 micron.
Okay, so we're talking a significant reduction in terms of thickness. As a result, likely a significant reduction in terms of volume. So Siobhan, for your premise, it's possible that the volume of those materials could possibly end up coming down. From a user perspective, right, the cost associated with doing the same job will come down because you're putting likely less film on the palette. And that's, I think, something that needs to be reiterated and stated. And I'm not sure if it came across that clearly, but I know from my own experience, because you're dealing with the roll that, is significantly lighter from an application perspective and a safety perspective, it's easier, for somebody who's using it, right? So that they're not lugging, a 20-pound roll around. I don't even remember what a roll of stretch film is like weight wise, but like that pre-stretch film is significantly lighter and easier to end up putting onto the palette, right?
With these pre-stretch films, I mean, you can drop them on the floor, and you don't have any roll damage. If I slammed it on the floor, it would almost jump into my hand like a basketball. Whereas the traditional, hand films, I remember going around to some of the big grocery chains at the end of the month, and they had a Gaylord of damaged film there. We would have to weigh the Gaylord minus the core and issue a credit. So, that's how this started 25 years ago with pre-stretch films. And now, like I said, this is becoming more common. We see it up and down the industrial parks. Everybody wants it once it's demoed the proper way. And with sustainability in play in plastic, it's gotten to be an easy sell. But you have to be able to show the key thing, which is, like I said earlier, containment. If you can show containment and you can contain your palette the same with a thinner material, why wouldn't you do that? And so if you're saving money.
Your key takeaway then is that, when you're talking to, your vendors, and I suspect from Canada Post's perspective, this is ultimately important too, because you want to ensure the fact that this stuff, when it's received in your plants, doesn't topple over, the contents aren't ending up being damaged, that, the buyer needs to talk to their source and say, hey, I want to be able to have something that'll contain that material. Okay, but here are some options that I want to be able to investigate. You guys mentioned PCR and that. Are there any limitations right now in terms of how you can incorporate, post-consumer materials into some of those films? And like, are there either some does it look different? Does it perform any differently? Are there any constraints in using PCR?
That's a great question, Andrew. And I think if we were to explore what's available in the market today, there are few and far, solutions available today on the market. And a lot of that boils down to the quality of the PCR that is in the market. North America is quite a bit behind in terms of the ability to process high quality PCR. When we look at opportunities to reuse plastic today in the market, it's sort of an open loop process where a lot of the stretch film is being collected today, and it's either being exported to be recycled or it's being recycled locally, but it's finding its way into other applications like plastic lumber, products that don't need to stretch as much, garbage bags. So it's really a downcycling effect that's happening in the market. Processes aren't really focused on sorting those waste streams, low density, linear low density, it's being commingled. And what happens when it gets commingled is that the quality is inferior to what we actually need to create a closed loop. So what we're doing is we're investing in this ourselves. So in Europe, we have $100 million investment that's underway where we have our own recycling capacity. That's been a 3-year project here on the go. Typically, Europe is 3 to 5 years ahead of the North American landscape. And the idea is that we will duplicate that success locally. Now, when I talk about that quality, that's really important for machine grade films, ultra high performance films, because the expectation is that those films stretch up to 300%. If you can imagine stretching anything 300% with any impurity, it's going to pop a hole. And so the quality of that feedstock, managing that whole process is paramount. And that's what we don't really have here, but we're quite soon going to have available to us in the North American market. If I pivot to hand film, however, there is no limitations today. We can formulate around the current PCR that's widely available in the market. It can be off-spec material, and that is the product that Bob showed you. It's that VMAX pre-stretch hand film, 30% PCR in a 30 gauge. And we're looking to take it a step further to have 25% in a 25 gauge. So certainly, the real positive thing about those hand films is that we're not having to formulate thicker to compensate for the gels and impurities. These products are as thin as their virgin counterparts in the market today. So you can have an immediate sustainability impact by migrating over to these products. And because it's applied by hand, there really is no discernible difference in application. It may be a little less rigid or durable on the puncture side, but we believe we've compensated for that through formulation and through certain adjustments in the development of the product. So I think we're in a really neat space, and I would highly encourage you to, or anyone to, explore the ability to migrate, especially on the hand film side. The machine film side will take a little bit more work. Generally speaking, there's a bit of optimization that's required. In order to get to that 30% level, we need to go a little bit thicker on the film. So what you don't want to happen is for companies who have been very good at reducing the amount of virgin film that they're using, let's say that they're using a 50 gauge film today, we don't want to be taking them to a thicker gauge just for the sake of saying it has recycled content in it. We should be first and foremost focused on the reduction strategy. And then when the opportunity presents itself, we can go with a PCR story. And oftentimes we're able to accomplish that if the end user is applying more than 2 top wraps and 2 bottom wraps to their palette. So if we have the ability to eliminate wraps and use a thicker film, then it's a really neat use case for a PCR-based machine film.
So can we, maybe migrate the conversation, or as you said, pivot the conversation to machine applications right now? Because I can attest, from a conversation that we had yesterday, okay, that there are people, amongst our membership and some of our followers who utilize smaller turntables in-house. You'll never end up seeing big kind of rotary tower applications that you'd see in commercial bottlers and the like, but you still do see smaller automated applications. What kind of things should they be looking at there, and are there things that they can potentially do to get better optimization on the film usage that may not just be related to film selection, like things like changing the gearing on machines or what have you? So can we talk about machine film then, possibly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one consideration that in my opinion, when we're looking at film selection and what's currently being used in the market. Generally speaking, if you're using a turntable wrapper, if you were to calculate your on-pallet pre-stretch, so that is, how much is that film being stretched while it's being applied to that pallet, that number is typically in and around the 200% threshold. What ends up happening, though, is that if you're using a film that's too thick for the application, you're actually not getting the benefits of that film. That film wants to come to home. It wants to compress back to its original state. And so a lot of the secret sauce behind, getting the proper containment levels to minimize damage, getting the full yield on a film, is selecting the right thickness of product with the right properties, so that at that 200% stretch level, you are nearing sort of the ultimate performance on that curve. And what I'm showing in the background here is an example where the blue line is a conventional 80 gauge film. And the chart is showing the containment forces as the amount of pre-stretch increases, okay, going from 0 to 300. With our 45 gauge Axis product, which is a highly engineered, ultra high performance machine film, it's 40% less plastic, up to 40%. But you can see that there's a point there, an inflection point, where at about 200% pre-stretch, the 45 gauge really kicks into gear, and it allows you to have the same levels of containment with that much less material. So, conceptually, end users don't really appreciate that they can get the same performance with a thinner film, because it's counterintuitive. They generally think, well, if I need more containment, I need to go to a thicker film. But that's not right. So I would encourage anyone on this call to download our Malpack Toolbox app, and you can quite simply calculate what your on-pallet pre-stretch is using a tape measure, and the weight of at just sort of a mini scale, which you can buy inexpensively on a site like Amazon. And by doing that, that'll get you a really good sense as to what your starting point is. And Andrew, you mentioned one option, that is re-gearing a machine. That is not an overly expensive exercise. So generally machines are supplied with 200 gears. Occasionally you can get them with 250% gears, but I would say by far 200 seems to be the standard. And so you do have a real opportunity to increase that gearing to maximize the yield that you have on that film. The second option is to look at increasing what we call secondary tension. So that's quite simply a knob. Typically a knob, or on an electronic interface, there should be a tension setting where you can increase the amount of tension, secondary tension, that is applied after the film is mechanically being pre-stretched with the gears. So those two options are really simple ways to do that, and Scott and his sort of distribution network can assist in that regard, and retooling machines to do that. And the ROI is very fast. And I think for anyone exploring that, you may as well explore speccing in or trialing an ultra high performance film at the same time, so that you get the maximum benefit out of investing that time.
So just to capture that before I kind of get to end of life situations, what the takeaways that I have are, talk to your supplier. If at all possible, do an on-site audit. Get that supplier in, actually get them to kind of look at what you're doing, how you're doing it, et cetera, et cetera. And then the key is to mate the right film to the right application. So, if it's heavier, there's a film that's likely suitable for that, either from a thickness perspective or from a performance perspective, or that mates up to the machine particularly well. Can we get a link to that app afterwards, just to share in the links to it once we post it to our YouTube channel? So we're kind of getting close to the end here, and I do have one question that I wanted to ask, because I think it's relevant to the folks at Canada Post, but I think it also has relevance to some of the people on the call as well, which is, what are some of the end of life scenarios that are available? And I mean, are there areas that perhaps you can provide some insight to, or provide some guidance around? Once you receive the materials, And, if you don't want to just be throwing them out into your dumpster and you want to, take, some measure to address that, what does end of life look like in some cases? And like, what are some of the parameters around that end of life?
Yeah, that's a good question, and a question we get asked quite frequently these days when with companies looking to increase their sustainability efforts. The number one challenge in the end of life scenario is accumulating enough volume for the economics to work. Quite frankly, when you look at the cost of transport and transporting, air-filled film, the weights are quite substantially different. If you were to fill a Gaylord with just loose film versus, film that has been baled. And what we're exploring today, which you can explore as well, is oftentimes with recycling partners, if there's enough material, and it could be a combination of corrugate and plastic, a lot of times they offer sort of sandwich baled solutions, pickup solutions, where you're able to bale the film with your cardboard and they will come and pick it up. And the economics vary depending on the volumes and where you're located. So I would say step one is to talk to your existing recycler about saying, hey, look, is there an opportunity to sandwich bales? If there's enough volume though in pure stretch film, let's say you're cutting it off, you're repacking pallets, I would explore the option of getting in a downstroke baler. And that will allow you to really compress and remove all of that air out of those bales and make it a very viable case for it to be picked up by any recycler. I'd say that's a very easy thing to do. We can certainly connect individuals who are interested in that with our local partners, recycling partners, and create a closed loop. So we're more than happy to arrange for pickups of baled film. I think that's probably the easiest end use scenario. But really the biggest challenge is around the loose film. And if you don't have the ability to bale it, then we sort of run out of options just because of the cost is extremely prohibitive to pick it up.
Thank you. Siobhan, I know this is of interest to you, but is there anything you want to ask about that then, possibly?
I'm curious, in your applications of using balers, who are you typically seeing load the baling and do the actual baling activity? I know we have various employees at our plant, so it could be a facility manager, it could be a janitorial staff, it could be Canada Post staff. Typically, on our end of things, it's usually best if the janitorial staff are available to do it. But I'm curious if there's either a trend that you see or any specific training that we need to provide employees.
Sorry, this is training on, it's a bit echoey in here, but I couldn't catch is it training on the application of the film or sortation? Is the application of film?
It would be the use of the baler itself. Actually, I know it's not necessarily a dangerous machine, but it's a machine that we do want folks to stay safe around. So I'm just curious if there's a trend in who in the facility you're seeing doing the baling, whether it's the warehouse employees or say janitorial staff or facility managers, as well as what sort of training you think anyone needs to be able to operate one of those balers.
Yeah, they come laden with sort of warning signs, don't stick your hand in here, this, that, and the other. But generally speaking, what we find is the individuals that are handling the garbage, this material is brought to an accumulation point. And then those individuals, a lot of times there are already compactors in place, and the downstroke baler is essentially a compactor. So individuals that are already placing materials in bins that are being compacted at a dock door, et cetera, we're finding that those are the individuals that typically get charged with, also processing the recycling.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's pretty similar to what we see in our facilities that do bale shrink wrap. So thank you for that.
Sorry, I've got a couple of questions that are coming out of the people who are attending here. Before we get to those, I really want to ask a quick question to Ricardo about this. Are there any precautions that people need to end up taking to ensure or to minimize the amount of contamination in that material? Because I remember, when I would see some of the stuff, where I worked, being recycled, there were a lot of things like bits of pallets and like paper license plates, and like a paper license plate for anybody's benefit is just a big sheet of paper. It could be an 8.5, 11 sheet with information on it. But like, do you guys, encourage, or does it really make that much of a difference? Like, is it just cleaned up at some point in time and you don't care, or?
We certainly care, and you should too, or anyone should too, because the value is directly correlated to the cleanliness. So if you're getting any value for that grade A bale, its highest value is with the least amount of contaminants. And when we talk about contaminants, it can be anything from plastic bags being mixed in with a bale. I mean, a general user says, well, it's all plastic, it's flexible plastic, I can just all recycle it together. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Those bags may be made of, low density material, and that's what really degrades the quality of that feedstock when you're looking to put it back into a closed loop environment with film. Paper labels, those, the general recycling equipment today can provide for paper. It actually likes paper in the recycling process. But at the end of the day, if there's an abundance of paper, abundance of labels, those are forms of gels that ultimately end up in the pellets and cause issues when you're trying to put that back into film. Other things like strapping is a common one where, individuals throw in strapping in with the film. So basically anything that gets wedged in there, any metals, unless it's aluminum or non-magnetic, it typically gets pulled out, with the equipment that's available today. So that's not an overly large issue. And then, wood is obviously an issue, but yeah, keeping it as clean as possible is certainly a coaching moment, and providing guidelines wherever that material is being accumulated or sorted is an important part to this process.
Thanks. So we got two questions. One is related to availability across the country. The question is, are your products available on the West Coast? How would one go about getting a sales rep to come for a visit, perform the tests you've described? I can see that Scott Roulston from Spicers is on the call, but as an attendee. So maybe if Scott, if you want to chime in on my answer, I think the best way to do it is to reach out to the folks at Spicers. Their link is in the chat. And then Scott Roulston, who is responsible for this segment at Spicers, his email address is attached to this as well. You can, send us at the Sustainable Mail Group, info@sustainablemailgroup.ca, any questions, and we'll gladly pass them on to the stakeholders. So if anybody at Spicers wanted to chime in on that, by all means do it. And then the last question we've got here is, does the reduced thickness of the film impact its recyclability at end of life?
It does not. So the thickness, there's essentially no correlation between the thickness and recyclability. However, the structure of the film may impact the recyclability. So oftentimes you can have materials that are multi-material structures, which really allow us to get the ultimate benefits of formulating thin. Polypropylene is a common, common polymer that's used to make film a little bit more stronger, resistant to punctures. And so we're working now through, various formulations to get closer to a mono-type material structure. But in doing that, we find that we have to go thicker. So it's really undoing all of the innovation that we've done over time. But we also have ongoing studies to prove recyclability, where with the amounts of polypropylene being put into, let's say, our films, it doesn't impede recycling rates. So short answer, thickness, nope, not an issue, but the formulation of the films may be an issue.
Thank you. That's it for questions, and we're like literally a minute over time. So let me just close up here. First of all, thank you both, Siobhan. Thank you, Ricardo. Thanks, Bobby, for being on this call. This was great. I mean, I appreciate the level of technical insight, and I think it showcases that it's really important for people to reach back out to their distributor and their subject matter experts to answer some of those questions. And just as an FYI, if you go to the recording, we'll send out an email to everybody once the recording has been posted. We'll include that Malpack tool as well. as I mentioned, it has been recorded. If you enjoyed the event, please feel free to share that video with your colleagues if they weren't able to attend. And to stay on top of our content, ensure that you subscribe to our feed. And most importantly, for us at least, in order to be able to bring this kind of content and engage, subject matter expertise in this level, is to join the group. I mean, the expense is not significant. A simple membership is on the order of $500 a year. And you'll get this kind of stuff, as well as our design guide. And stay tuned, as we are going to be launching a plastics roadmap in conjunction with the folks at Canada Post in the month of July. So stay on top of that. Thank you all. Thanks. Have a great afternoon. Have a great morning if you're there. And we'll see you all.
Thanks, everyone. Take
Thank
care.
you, Andrew.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.